Всем привет! Я очень рада вас всех здесь видеть, и давайте знакомиться. Меня зовут Настя. Сейчас я занимаюсь аналитикой информационной безопасности в компании Whoosh. До этого я работала...
My name is Anastasiia. I work at Whoosh previously.
Поэтому сегодня вашему вниманию мой опыт от всех тех приключений, которые я успела повидать.
I would like to share with you my experience.
Направлен в первую очередь на те компании, которые уже вышли из состояния...
First of all, I would like to tell you about the company that previously had 10 people, and now they have more. Now they have more people, now they have different changes when they change their strategy. And there are three main areas. So I will tell about those. Let us start. First, when we are talking about non-specialists, when there is an option to start to do something, we don't always understand what should be done. And because of that, we don't really know who is supposed to do that. When there is no information security department in a company, or maybe there is, but it's not enough, we can say that a part of the responsibility can be covered by experts from other departments, maybe by legal people, maybe by IT people, and finally we can outsource those solutions. Obviously, there is a certain footnote here, but I will tell about it later. So, technical people can work really well with infrastructure, they understand what needs to be done right here, right now, and they can use it. If you need to do something very urgently, probably you should work with technical people. If you need to work with compliance, well, maybe you have different priorities, then you should work with legal people. They will be great in terms of legislation, and obviously technical people probably won't help you there. Legal people will help you with documents, which you will have to have sooner or later. But here is a little caveat. The caveat here is that technical people don't understand legal journal, and legal people don't really understand technical people. And you need to find a point of communication, some kind of translator that would be communicator between those two departments, so that each other understand it. If there is no information security specialist, then it could be someone else, someone who has both legal and technical background. Sooner or later, your technical experts and legal experts would finally start speaking the same language. It would help both with compliance and with understanding the problems and how to solve them. At the same time, information security specialist is always more useful. It depends on what you need. There is a process person who will help you make all the processes into a system. Obviously, it will take time, but you will be able to work with the comprehensive system, with all the actions, with all the processes and events. And you have an option of a technical specialist who will help you solve urgent problems. So what's the caveat here? The thing is that you have to understand what exactly you need to do right now. That's exactly the point I mentioned before. If you rely on outsource, you have to understand what you want to do. You can't just go there and make it great. Well, it's not defined enough. Well, they can do great. Maybe you don't have enough money for them to make it great. When I was preparing for this presentation, I had a few questions which you should, or maybe you can answer and understand in which area you should move. First of all, what should be covered? The areas which you really need. Maybe you work with personal data, maybe you work with payments, maybe you work in a very niche area. And these are the things which require different experts. So first you have to define what exactly do you need, and then you have to understand who will do it better. Legal people, InfoSec people, IT people, and so on. If you put some responsibility on people who are not supposed to do that, Obviously, first, you have to let them know so that they are aware of this. And second, they have to understand why they do this. Because if they don't, obviously, if they don't care, you can expect, well, you know what to expect. So what do we want to get as a result? As a result, we want to get some kind of scheme how a company would live until it has a dedicated information security department. So basically to avoid any problems. Sometimes you have to care more about compliance, sometimes you have to care more about the technical part, but it's possible to avoid all the problems until you have a dedicated department. Second point, you have to understand what you need. When we're talking about the plan, it will help you to answer this question, will help you to understand what kind of specialists do you need right here, right now. And point number 3, before you have experts, before you have InfoSec department, the whole responsibility should be shared, but will be shared among all other departments, and they have to understand this responsibility and why they need to do this. Next point, compliance. Compliance is a very sensitive topic, and the only thing I can propose here is that try to consider compliance not as some kind of requirements you should follow strictly, letter by letter, but some kind of guidelines which you can use to counteract threats. Yes, sometimes there are situations where regulators don't really clearly explain what exactly they wanted to do with this requirement or with these actions. Obviously, not everyone is perfect. But if you try to understand what exactly they meant by this regulation, it will make everyone's life easier. It should be noted that probably you are working within multiple legislations. So if you analyze all different legal requirements you have to follow and then you see how do you make it, maybe it will be easier, because sometimes measures intersect. And with a single action in terms of security, you can cover multiple requirements from different legislations, which will save you time and resources. Point number 2. If you have some very specific, industry-specific points, you better talk to legal people on this point. Your lawyers will help you with legislation and different precedents which happened before. And that's the difference between legal people and technical people. Technical people work with hardware, software, and they just don't have enough time to track down the legislation. They don't really care about this, it's not their interest. But the legislation is there, and those changes should be tracked before they are passed into law. And obviously your lawyers and legal people can help you with that instead, because they work this on a regular basis. This is what they do. And obviously they will help you here. So going back to the plan, what do you really need? The point here is that not to build that sandcastle, because it will collapse as soon as the first pen test comes. If you build your organization following compliance, you should think beforehand, where would you put these efforts instead? It's not really easy to see that. Previously, I got a lot of experience and help from a code academy, where I would see and hear what they actually wanted to do in the first place. So you understand what they wanted to do, but you don't really understand, you don't always understand it when reading the requirements. So the point, you have to understand what you have to do now, how do you decrease the risks. There are different options. but you have to understand what problem had to be covered initially. Finally, the second point is that you have to use one action and to cover multiple requirements with a single product, with a single service. By doing so, you will be able to have a better, more comprehensive process. Then you will not just tackle a single problem, but you will act more strategically. And another important point, in all the conferences I try to say this and do it at the same time. Information security follows the business. It's not the end. It's not the final goal. You have to understand why it matters for business. If you are sure that your actions will benefit the business, then you will have higher chance in implementing this security. Sometimes approving, sometimes getting money, but it will increase your chances. So what do we have as a result? As a result, we should have a certain map, maybe a roadmap. What should be covered? How do we do that? And when do we do that? Here's a little trick. If you have this kind of roadmap on what, where, when, and you follow it, and you follow all the requirements from the compliance, and even if you have an audit, and something is not here, is not done, but the regulator can see that you have a plan and you stick to it, they will treat you more, well, they will not penalize you as severely as could have been otherwise. They give you some time to fulfill this, to implement this into real life. They can see that you have a plan, you just haven't implemented it yet. Next point, finishing the actual items. It might sound strange, but if you just wait for business to have enough money, well, it will never happen. When somebody says that they need to do something, well, it's not clear who needs and what needs to be done. Until you have very specific measures and very specific beneficiaries, it will not move. Unfortunately, but this is the reality. You either have to dedicate a manager or you have to take upon the responsibility yourself. But once again, this is the reality. First, you have the person responsible for that, then you have the tasks, then you check the work, then you check and approve it, and finally you follow it again. Still, it's very important. You cannot just implement something, you cannot just say that it's beautiful, it works. It doesn't work like this. You have to maintain whatever you implemented before. And unfortunately, you have to write documents. That's a problem, but that's the reality. The question is, how many and what kind of documents? You could have these documents in your laws and bylaws, or it depends on what level you want to do that. If you have a described a process in a doc file or somewhere else, it's good enough. The point is that you have a description of a process, but you have to understand if the process is rigid or flexible, because if it's too rigid, probably the process would not live too long. Small companies develop all the time, they have new departments, they have new areas, they have new services, products, and because of that, rigid processes most likely will not survive. That is why processes should be flexible. They should be changeable, they cannot be immutable. And obviously, there should be someone responsible for the process. There should be a person. Now we move on. We're talking about risk prioritization. Well, business ranks those priorities. But for business to make an adequate ranking, and for us to at least agree on most of them, we should give business the full list of data to assess those requirements. If we fail to do so, of what we have, or maybe we do not explain the whole situation in the company as it is right now, there is a chance that business might miss something, might misremember something, and then the priorities would surprise you. If you want to get something from business, you have to provide 100% of all the information they require. You have to give them data for analysis. So how can we help here? Well, first of all, it's the main risk map. This is the risk-oriented approach, which was mentioned just a few presentations ago. In positive technologies, we've changed this in the concept of inadmissible events. Inadmissible events are those two words which helped me understand business. What exactly do they want? When we started to discuss those accessible or admissible or inadmissible events. And based on these consequences, which can be critical for a business, we start to build different angles of attack, how we can reach this. After we analyze these vectors, obviously they can be in information security, they can be in other industries. Information security is both everywhere and we cannot track everything. So if you analyze accounting risks, you have to work with accountants. You have to talk to them, you have to see their life. Maybe you will understand what they need. If you're working with HR risks, you have to talk to them. You have to ask what are they afraid of. And maybe you will learn something new about HR processes, which previously you never even thought about. It was never of interest. Moreover, besides the risk-oriented story, which is discussed with C-level suite and approved by C-level, we have to set priorities. It's very important to understand what was done in order to understand what we will have to do. And prioritization is a very good way to show that you actually do some work, but also to demonstrate that you already did this and did that, and we continue doing this. But we need some support. We need to understand what exactly should we prioritize. Where should we put our efforts into? So that's the point. The business should prioritize your activities. They should tell you what should be done first. Finally, we have control and analyzing the results. Even if you build something, even if you have a process, maybe you mitigate some potential threat, you should not forget that it's not static. It's always changing. You have to maintain whatever you introduced. Contingency plan on what should be done and if you don't have any of these options. Well, first of all, you have to understand what do you protect from. It's actually a very simple question and not many can answer it. You can protect from tsunami, you can protect from hackers, from careless employees. You have to understand what kind of threat you're protecting from and what kind of ramifications are inadmissible. If you're just trying to protect from abstract things, it won't work. You have to be very specific. When we are talking about consequences, I think it's important to have a response to. When you understand what are you afraid of, you also need to understand how do you react and how do you respond in case this happens. Obviously, panicking around and shouting A, it's a good plan, but it doesn't work. When we do understand what should be done in case something goes wrong, you should understand who will be a responsible person. If we are talking about collective responsibility, usually it's collective irresponsibility. If you can at least dedicate a department for this, you should do this. And when we are talking about business, you should count money. Sometimes it's easier to accept a risk than to analyze it or to do something to decrease the risk. Sometimes it's just easier to accept the risk. At least it's cheaper. So if we follow this monthly plan, we get some kind of strategy on what we want to get in an time. Then we get soft implementation of information security to main products. There are cases, there are very strict information security people who would say strictly we will do X and not Y. Well, it's not anymore the case. Now people for information security do it in a more softer way, with communication and exchange of ideas. If business remembers about you only when something fails, well, at least that's something that's almost a victory. And that's why it's important to be open to business. You should talk to your C-level, you should talk to your colleagues. Just because your colleagues don't know what kind of questions to refer you to, they will never remember about you until something happens. Well, if you have an encrypted workstation, it's clear you have to go to InfoSec person. But if it's something suspicious and you're not really sure, they will not ask you if they are afraid of you. Well, you should be open to business. You should make them talk to you. You should make them, well, basically like you. If they can address you before they have problems, it will be beneficial for everyone. If they ask you about a contractor or a subcontractor and you can double check them, that's great, but if you know about this post-factum, after it happened, then it's too late. Now, talking about process implementation, I think DevSecOps is the easiest way to describe it. Well, implementation, I think, is a scary word. It's always stress, and it's impossible to alleviate the whole pain. Because even if it's your own, if it doesn't really work well, it's okay. But when something else, something alien is implemented, it's usually very painful. You have to work in a different box. You have to adapt to new things, and it is everywhere. Even if you get a new box, it's very comfortable, it works great, you will have resistance, and resistance is okay. You just have to go through this resistance before it reaches critical mass. And we can start with analyzing.
Поменять свое восприятие и смотреть на коллег, которые будут пользоваться системами, которые вы хотите
применить,
как на конечных пользователей продукта.
Кем бы они ни были, basically, you have to care about users, about your users. Because if you analyze a product based on the information security requirements, but also on the user requirements, which will, or who will actually use your product, then the chances are you will not have to implement something else. And that's good. When originally you discussed with your users and what exactly do they need and what exactly do they want to get, then you have a very specific tailored solution you are looking for on the market, and that's important. Next point, if you do not know what to implement, you are not one-on-one, you're not alone with this market. We're all here, we have a big community, we have many people who are ready to share expertise and help you. You should ask your colleagues for advice, you should ask community for advice. We have brilliant guys and girls who can share their experience, who can share their pains and problems they actually faced before. And it works. Next point, analyzing accessible resources. It's not just about the money we would spend on a product. You should understand how much you would spend on the maintenance. You should understand how much you would spend on the pilot version, how much it will be spent on something if it doesn't work. You should analyze all the resources in the full cycle. And even maintenance, it's very important. It takes a lot of time when you implement new processes. You cannot just say, okay, so this is the new process and this is how we should be doing things now onwards. It doesn't work, it should be more softer, it should be more organic. There are requirements from our users, requirements from our information security departments, and we have to understand what exactly do we need and what we can have. When we're talking about budgets, obviously. When we have different requirements which we would like to have, the price also increases by a factor of maybe 10. But medium companies don't really have too much money to spend on this. So if you have something which might be useful in a few years, but we don't really need right now, probably want to be approved right here, right now. So you have to differentiate between must-haves and nice-to-haves. And you have to be very strategic and very sober about this. Next point is that what is present on the market. It's not just about options on the market, because usually there are a lot of different options. There are foreign solutions, there are domestic solutions, there are solutions which replaced foreign solutions, and in real life, a single person cannot test all of them, and it's normal. It's important to understand here what system or what product should be used, so that multiple requirements could be covered. Once again, we are talking about compliance requirements, we are talking about information security requirements, user requirements, and then as a result, we can see that a single product can alleviate our pain on multiple levels, which will be great. Next point is feedback. If you have a pilot version, you should ask your end users, do they like this? Is it comfortable for them? Because if they keep silent and it's implemented, then it might turn out that it's not really great, it lacks functionality, and nobody would use it. That's why it's important to see if it works. A process would work until it provides more benefits than problems. That's the reality. If a process is not suitable, if a process is not comfortable, people would reject it. People would use something they used before. Next point is there is always a holder of a process. You can look at someone's face and understand why it works like this. There should be a person responsible for everything at different stages. If there is no person responsible, nothing would work. There is no magic. And obviously, for the next time, for the nth time, I'm talking about maintenance. Maintenance is important, it should be all the time. So to sum it up, we spoke about people, we spoke about people from different departments, and that they can help to live until you have a dedicated information security department and to avoid any potential problems. Next point, based on your needs, you can either look into the technical people side, who can help you right here, right now with the infrastructure processes, the hardware part, or you can work and look into the process people who can help you with building the strategy and systems for the future. Point number 3, outsourcing. Outsourcing is great if you understand what exactly do you want. If you go there, you have to have a very specific solution you are looking for. Next point, compliance. Well, you have to comply. Following legislation is of utmost importance. It depends on on how you treat this, but you still have to do this. Maybe you are building sandcastles, which will collapse after the first pen test, or maybe you try to understand what exactly they meant by these requirements. And obviously, you have to write documentation. Next point, prioritization. Prioritization is defined by business, but for this, they need the correct input data, taking into account the resources and all the whole cycle, what we should do, when we should do. It's important to count money. When we are analyzing risks, there is an option to say that it's easier and cheaper to accept risk than try to fight it. And finally, the implementation. We take into account both requirements for our product as information security people, but also requirements from our end users. Otherwise, it will be an uncomfortable process, and if it's uncomfortable, if it's not used by anyone, it won't work. And obviously, if we implement a process, we have to maintain this. If we have a great DLP and it shows and sends us great alerts, well, first of all, we have to remember that we have a DLP. We have to have a person who works with this, and they don't just process it, they actually change something based on this process. Something should work, something should improve. If you have any questions, if you disagree, or maybe you want to talk, you are welcome. Here are my contacts. Thank you.
Вопросы из аудитории.
We have a question from the audience. If I have a small company and low budget, how do we work? Do we work with a single specialist or work with an outsource? It depends. It depends on how big or small your company is, and it depends on how well you understand what exactly you want to get from outsource. If you go to outsource, you have to be very specific about your final result. To have something great is a bad result. But if you have a clear understanding of what you really need, then you can try and reach an outsourcing company. But you should understand that outsourcing will not do by themselves. They can help you, they can provide recommendation, give a good advice, a piece of advice, but maybe write a documentation. But to react inside the company, you would have to do it by yourself, and you still have to spend resources.
What helped you in studying information security, and how long did it take you? What was your school? It's a very complex question because I cannot point you to a single resource. It's a mixed bag of very different things, different textbooks, sometimes not obvious ones like schematics. I mentioned CodeIB Academy in my presentation. That's the name of the company. It's one example, and they are great at collecting presentations and reports, including stream recordings. They provided great materials on threat modeling, time-lapse data as well, and I saw an explanation by the author of that model there as well. What are the first steps for a small company to build up their security function? I can't give you a quick response. I've just given a presentation on that. Just look up the recording, and well, I think that's all. Thank you.